We're delighted to be here with you today. David Fraher.
Thanks, Manuel.
Arts Midwest. Really, at this point in time, they've become synonymous. How long have you been with Arts Midwest?
I have been with this regional organization just about 36 years. I joined the staff as executive director of an organization called Affiliated State Arts Agencies of the Upper Midwest. Very long name that could not be turned into an acronym. If you turned it into an acronym, it sounded more like a Buddhist chant. It's like a song. It was terrible. And I joined in 1983. I'd been the executive director at the Wyoming Arts Council when I came in. We were a small region, 5 upper Midwest states, the Dakotas, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And was here probably about 6 months. And one of my board members got into a conversation with a board member of another regional organization that was based in Cleveland at the time, a group called Great Lakes Arts Alliance. And we began a discussion. I got a phone call from my board member who said, I was stuck in an airport with this other guy, and it was snowing, and we couldn't take off, and we sat in the bar, and we talked about our work, we talked about our regional organizations, and we both said, why do we have 2? What if we just had 1? And we went into a year-long process, about an 8-month process, really, of all of the board members in all of the states and going through this aggressive deep dive about merger. And that was May of '84. In January of '85, our 2 boards independently voted to proceed with a merger. There was planned then to take effect in July of '85. So it was a pretty fast track. And one of the steps involved with that was actually we had a planning retreat in, appropriately enough, New Harmony, Indiana, at a Quaker retreat center, which was wonderful. And one of the things that we did was a board member who was connected to Procter & Gamble hooked up with one of their brand management folks and said, find us a name. These are the 2 names, and they're big, and they're long, and they're unwieldy. And so this guy went out and focus grouped various options and came back and presented to the board. He said, here are all of these different options. But he said, I think the best name, the one that resonated the most, was Arts Midwest. And he said part of the reason is that what people realized, A, it said what we were about and where we were about it. And it didn't have anything like alliance or association. So if you were looking at something from a public perspective, it was inviting. It wasn't like, okay, this is an association, I don't belong to that. This is about a thing, a concept, a place, an idea. And we made Arts Midwest in 1985. So it's I've effectively been the CEO of this particular organization since then, but from a corporate perspective, it's since '83.
Given that Arts Midwest came to be as the merger of 2 regional organizations, and understanding the expense involved, mostly for the arts agents and managers to attend various conferences around the country to connect with presenters. Do you see any down the road in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, who knows, any potential benefit to the possibility that the 3 regional conferences that occur in August, September might actually also merge as one, and that there might be one winter conference, such as APAP, and one summer-fall conference of some unnamed entity, but that would in essence be the merged conglomerate group of the three that currently function during that time of the year?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think it's a question that will always be explored. I think that change and evolution is constant. So Arts Midwest as a regional organization obviously came out of this merger process. The Arts Midwest Conference actually grew out of what was years ago known as a KUKA Midwest. Before arts presenters, or now arts professionals, APAP, moved to the East Coast and changed its name, it was a KUKA, the Association of College and University Community Arts Administrators. And they were headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin. They started there. And they ran the New York show. And they also ran, because of their location, they ran a Midwest conference. But they moved that Midwest conference around. So in one season, one year it might be in the old affiliated state arts agencies region, in another it might be in the Great Lakes region, in the third it might be in Mid-Americas region. And it was always rotating. And then there were countless, at that point, state and sub-regional conferences as well. And when they moved, I remember having a conversation with their director at the time, Susie Farr. She said, "We're not going to do the regional conferences anymore. We're done. You know, we're a national organization. We have no business running a regional conference." And by that point, Arts Midwest was Arts Midwest, serving the 9 states in the upper part of the region, and Mid-America and Kansas City had the 6 states in the southern part of the central United States. And my colleague Henry Moran from Mid-America and I sat with Susie and said, "We'll take it. We'll do it." But we then went about the process of having conversations with most of the sub-regional conferences, so Southwest presenters, Plains, all these folks who kind of had these smaller satellite events, and said, "We will make sure that you have space, visibility, support, etc. But let's try and consolidate this. Let's make this one and put as much emphasis into a single event as possible so that we can draw the presenters in and make it more efficient and economical for the agents and managers and artists so that they're not constantly jumping from one satellite to another satellite." And we were pretty effective at that. There's still now a couple of state conferences that pop up, and they're there. But by and large, it became this thing. Our first conference was 1988, and there were about 220 attendees or so. We were in a ballroom at the Hyatt Hotel here in Minneapolis, and it was just tabletop exhibition room, and it was very intimate, to say the least. This year we've got about 1,250 people and 50,000 square feet of exhibition space, and it's a big show. But all of that as background to say, evolution and change inevitably happens. So coming back then specifically to your question, 20 years from now, might there be, a single conference? Maybe. 20 years from now, how much of this conference may be digitized? How much, how are people going to be working 20 years from now? I don't know the answer to that yet. But I think it's important for us to look around and examine how other fields are responding to some of this, and say, okay, what can we do? We're looking at questions all the time about, okay, when you add this many more people to an event like this, and you've got, let's say, 11 hours of time open in a schedule for the exhibit hall, is that enough time for all of those people now to be able to meet with the managers and agents who are there? Is the demand so high that we actually need to expand even more of the hours? And you know, we're watching all of these evolutionary things occur, the shift from serendipity in the hall to appointments. You know, some folks come in, some of the presenters are coming in at this point with every single moment of their calendar for while they're here booked with appointments. And the opportunity for them to go and explore and discover something becomes diminished. So it's like, okay, how do we adjust that? How do we respond? Are there ways that some of this work can happen through, can this be kind of central, but then throughout the year there are additional kinds of occurrences, interactions, but those may be online. Those may be taking a different perspective. So there's always something there. I don't know yet if you go to one or if it's just a continual evolution of the whole. So.
You've given a welcoming speech, which I recall, not for 36 years, but for the many years that I have attended. And it rarely changed. It was pretty much the same speech.
Yep.
And I said to you one time, you haven't changed the speech? And you kind of apologized. And I said, no, there's nothing to apologize for. It's perfect as it is. You've stated, I welcome you. I hope to see you at the opening night reception. And then there are showcases, and I will be there. And I look forward to seeing you there, because that's what we're all about. How do you view the concept, the meaning of the word networking, which we hear stated so frequently, and that the industry is all about relationships and networking versus a commitment or responsibility to seek out new and interesting talent to bring to your community, perhaps by attending juried or independent showcases, or speaking to a new agent or two that you haven't encountered before?
Sure. I mean, I think I don't think the concepts are mutually exclusive. I think they're complementary. When I think of networking, it's a word I don't use a lot, I have to say, but when I think of networking, I actually think again of something that is not static. There's no stasis within that network. That the network is in and of itself kind of an organically evolving process where new nodes come in. If you have a network and you say, okay, I've got a network and it's 12 people, you're in a lot of trouble because a node can drop out, and you're only going to be hearing and experiencing the same things. So that might be a core group of buddies, but in terms of having it be kind of a source of inspiration, a source of information, of knowledge, you need to kind of continually add elements to that network. I went to the sponsored showcases for a while last night, and once again was in awe of the attendees at this conference. They amaze me every year, and I say this as part of that ongoing repetitive speech that I've given, but I've always referred to this as the hardest working conference in the business. Because, and maybe it's, I don't know if it's Midwestern or what, or if there's just an attitude, or if it's something that we drive that message home all the time. People, when the hall opens up, the agents and managers and artists are in the hall, and they're there ready to greet people, and the presenters come streaming in, and they work the hall as long as they possibly can, and we sometimes have to drag them out when hall hours end. They don't want to leave. And last night I went to the showcases, and the theater was packed. The theater was packed. People were there seeing the work. I had to stand in the back because I couldn't spot a couple of open seats, so I just stood in the back and finally went upstairs into the balcony because the main level was full. And I thought, yeah, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And they were working the halls on the independent showcases, and there were people flowing through. I think that they also know and have this ability to bring in and add new folks, new colleagues in. That's my other favorite event of the conference, is the new colleague orientation. And we walk into that room and see, 150 folks. This is their first time coming. Now, some of that I know is because people come based on geography. So you'll pick up 75 people, let's say, on an annual basis that are just here because it's close by and they've never been and they want to see what it's about. And they might not come next year because it's further away and it costs too much, or they might stay. But then there's another 75 or 100 people who do come and stay, and that makes up for the kind of inevitable attrition of folks like me saying, okay, I'm going to be here. It's time to go. Or I'm going to move to another region, or I'm going to go to another industry, or I'm going to do. But I watch what happens in that room of new colleagues every year, and the mentors that are there helping people, enter into this community, and it amazes me. So I do think that there's both a combined sense of exploration. There's a network of folks that is a core thing, where people get together and they have their dinners together each year, and they know that this is when they're going to be there. But there's also this process of building and adding and bringing in new, and it's an interesting thing to watch evolve. It really is.
How did you connect or discover the world of the arts?
By accident. I grew up in Rochester, New York, in what I guess we would describe as an incredibly blue-collar family. My dad was a machinist for 39 years for General Motors. He made it through 8th grade, I think, and the school burned down in the town that he lived in, and that was that. And it was in the period of the Depression. He moved from his farm to Rochester and got a job with GM and stayed with them his whole career and was happy and fortunate. And it was that bubble of life that wasn't then that you could do that. My mom was a nurse, and I grew up in a house that they moved to when I was like a year old that had, I think, 4 bedrooms upstairs and 1 bathroom. And every one of those bedrooms was rented out to a boarder so that they could make the payments on the house. And we lived in the pantry. That was my brother's and my room. And my parents' room was the dining room converted into a bedroom. And so there was the one bathroom that we shared with the boarders, and they got first dibs. So it was, you know, my parents were not arts people. They just didn't have time. That was not part of their realm. They believed in learning. They believed in education. But I had never been to an art museum. I had seen an orchestra once, I think, because we had a field trip when I was like in 8th grade. I'd never seen a live theater production until I was like in 11th grade. The National Touring Shakespeare group came through and I saw a play. It was not part of my world. What I did have was a library card. My mother got me a library card as soon as I could read and walked me to the library, and it was my responsibility to go through and pick out what I wanted to read. And it was the first place she ever let me go by myself. It was about 5 blocks away, and you know, you lived right in the center of the city. And, but she would let me go to the library, and I was voracious about that. I think that's where, you know, I learned curiosity and the importance of curiosity. So reading was essentially my first gateway. Those were dark days for a whole array of reasons. And, you know, moving into the late 60s, mid-late 60s was a tough time for a lot of folks. And I joined the whole process of seeing how much trouble I could possibly get into in my life. And found my way into the principal's office on a consistent and regular basis with ever-increasing opportunities for problems and disaster. Frankly, at one point I just got kicked out of school. And
really?
it was not a pleasant thing, but I also at that point had already started to write. I'd kind of like taken up this thing of like writing poetry. I had no idea where it came from, but I just started writing poetry. And there was a nun. It was a Catholic high school, and there was a nun there who had seen it because I'd submitted some of it to the literary magazine in the school. I thought, okay, here. And she went to the principal and said, "Here's the deal. You know, you're applying too much stress here. You know, let this kid in to finish his senior year, and I will take responsibility for him. You know, I will make sure that he doesn't try and take over the school anymore, or you know, chain the doors shut so that, you know, the teachers can't get in, or any of that stuff that I might have been doing before." She said, I'll be responsible, but let's design this curriculum for this last year. And she said, and if you don't do that, I quit. She said, I quit being a teacher here because I think you're like negating what we're supposed to be about. And she said, I quit being a nun. She said, because I can't abide what's going on. And he agreed, and so they let me back in. And she gave me a copy of Lawrence Ferlinghetti's A Coney Island of the Mind, which was the first book of poetry I think I ever owned. And I went through it like in 30 seconds. I just dove in. And then we went to a bookstore, and I just started pulling out all of this other stuff from Ginsberg and, you know, eventually Dylan Thomas and all of these different writers. And I fell in love with that. And somehow that and her work with me in that senior year actually got me into college. I was miraculously got into college, got a scholarship. And I went went to the State University of New York at Brockport. Thank you, Nelson Rockefeller, a man who deeply believed in education and made it affordable for everybody. And Brockport had gotten a grant from, I think, again, the Rockefeller Foundation at that point, or Ford Foundation. And they were developing the early version of what was then a contractual liberal arts major. And I was like one of 2 students that they led into that program. I got a job as a security guard on campus, but I got myself placed in the Fine Arts Building so that I could, even in my job, what I would do is just hang out with all of the performance students who were going into rehearsal rooms, and I'd sit outside their rehearsal rooms and listen to them. And I was not a performer. I was not a visual artist at all. But this was just like, yeah, this is all here. And I didn't realize that, and there wasn't, I think, at that point. I don't think there was like a career path for that. I thought I would end up, you know, getting a graduate degree and teaching literature in some college, and this would just be there. And all of a sudden, you know, what I realized 40-some years ago is that, hey, there could be a career here. I was very active in the anti-war movement, and in high school even. And I had all of this anti-war material shipped, you know, brochures and banners and everything else, and I thought, oh, I can't send this to home. And I was part of student government, and I had it shipped to the school. So this box arrives at the front desk of the school, and, you know, my name on it, you know, et cetera, and they thought, So they opened it up, you know, as schools would do, and they looked at it and they said, okay, that's it, we're done. This guy is like, he is out of here. This is just not okay. Well, you know, you do what you do.
You said something earlier about the importance of being curious.
Mm-hmm.
What is the importance of being curious?
For me, it's everything. I think that if we lack curiosity as human beings, we will die as a species. I think curiosity is what affords us the opportunity to question, to say, you know, why is this way? What would be different or better if we maybe did something that way? It's how we adjust and evolve to the world. You know, if you just kind of walk through life and you just kind of say, okay, I accept everything just as it is and I don't need to know any more than what I know. A, it would be incredibly boring. B, what would be done? What would happen in life? You know, we wouldn't, you know, you're sitting here filming this on an iPhone. Because Steve Jobs sat around and said, you know, well, why can't I have a phone that does more than like talk? And why can't it be all these other things? And the people that are building this are that way. I think that artists by nature are incredibly curious people. And I think that if we trigger curiosity, I talked a little bit about my father as a machinist. And I wrote a piece earlier this spring on an Arts Midwest blog post about curiosity and related it all back to my dad because, and I didn't realize it at the time, and I don't think I realized it until just very recently, that I think that my curiosity came from him. he was a machinist. And he, you would say, okay, well, that could be a pretty boring job. You go in every day and you kind of set up a machine to make parts that then get put into a car. But there's just like, he's just making bolts. He's setting up a lathe. And what's there, what's creative there, and what it was for him is that every single day he looked at the job that he was doing, and he looked at the machine, and he would say, if we did this a little differently, we would have, fewer trash parts. Because the way that we're doing this, we're making too much stuff that is not right. So he would adjust. And, fairly frequently, he would come home from the factory on payday, and he would have his lunchbox, and inside the lunchbox he had his payroll check. And he would also have an envelope, and that envelope was like bright orange. And it said across the front, suggestion. And what it was, it had like this suggestion box, and he would constantly kind of like rethink the systems. And he would come up with new ways, and then he would put them into the suggestion box, and the factory managers would look at them and they would say, okay, yep, we're going to implement it. And they'd figure out how much money he would have saved the company, and he would get a bonus. And bonuses were big for us. That was real stuff. But for him, it was also getting this bright orange envelope and being able to bring that home. I mean, he's like getting it, the manager comes down through and says, here it is. And it's like, wow, okay, I did it. And he was both curious about the process, and he was incredibly creative in how he solved problems. And that's where that came from. So for me, curiosity is essential. It's essential to life. It's essential to our work. You see behind us the Be Curious banner, because it's for Arts Midwest. When we were started into the transition process, my board said, and the advisor said, what's essential to this organization? And we said that what's essential is not a program, not a project. What's essential are the values and the core, and what's essential, what we don't want to lose, is our sense of curiosity.
There is a fund that has been established that has your name.
Yep.
What is that?
First of all, it's an incredible honor. That's one thing. There was it's called the David Fraher Fund for Innovation, and my board members started it themselves. And their goal is to raise about $1 million. That's what we're trying to get to. We're on our way. We're well on our way. I'm hoping we will still get to $1 million. It's essentially an endowment. It's going to be a permanent fund within Arts Midwest. And the income generated from that fund would be available on an annual basis to the organization to invest in new ideas, to try new things. What we've learned over time is that you can go out to a foundation, to a funding source, and say, we have an idea for a new project or a new program or a solution to this issue. And normally what you get back is, wow, that's really interesting. Let us know how it's working, and we will, combat that. What's the proof point you got here? And there aren't a lot of places that you can go and get funding for something that hasn't been somewhat tested. And so what we've tried to do over time is to kind of carve out little pieces of money each year to say, okay, let's try this, or let's put it there. And what we want to do is institutionalize that capacity to make it a permanent thing. I mean, I mentioned this the other day when I'm talking with some folks, but we did a huge exhibition of the works of the Native American artist George Morrison about 3 or 4 years ago. A major retrospective, the first really significant retrospective of George's work. 80-some pieces, a tour to the Smithsonian Museum in New York City, Smithsonian Native American Museum there, at the Heard Museum. It was in the region here. The project ultimately was about a $500,000, $600,000 project over the period of its tour and everything else. We started it with a $6,000 investment to get a curator who could put together a prospectus of what this would look like. What's the work? Why is it important? Who will care? What was George? Why is George so critical? $6,000. And from that $6,000, we were able then to go to foundations and say, this is what we're after. This is what we want to do. We were able to go to museums and say, are you interested in this? And move it forward. That's the kind of thing that the Fund for Innovation is going to be for. And our goal is that the ideas wouldn't be limited to internal sources, but that if agents and managers had a really interesting idea about, could we ever try to do this at the conference? That could go into the pool and say, okay, is this something that we want to invest in? So that it kind of is sourcing community innovation, if you will.
Fabulous. It's a really rather remarkable thread that ties you back to your own father and your lives.
Absolutely.
What would you want a young person that is either considering or has chosen to enter the world of the performing arts? What would you wish to tell them? Suggest that they consider?
Invest early in your retirement plan.
Yes.
Because you're going to need it.
Especially as a self-employed artist.
Exactly. No, I think that my biggest advice always is in fact to kind of remain curious, to not limit yourself, to not kind of build a box around and say, I am X, but just understand that maybe you're X for now, but that's going to continue to move forward and evolve and change. Be really open to the new, to different things. We haven't done it for a while, but we used to play a game in the office called, what the hell is going on and what the hell does that have to do with my work? And I think that that's it's an important question because I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, there were maybe 500 food trucks in the United States. And now there's more than 500,000. What does that have to do with the performing arts? And I actually think and believe it has a lot to do with the performing arts. Because I think the growth of food trucks is driven by two things. One is it's about, in some cases, it's about young emerging chefs who don't have the money to go into bricks and mortar restaurant, but want to build their name and their brand and their capacity. In another case, it's about established chefs who want to break out from their brick and mortar boundary and do something different. And I also think it's underpinned by the fact that people want to access quality eating in a different way, in a different place, in a place of convenience. Why do I only present chamber music in a theater? Why does it have to be a 2-hour concert? Why is there an intermission? Why does it start at 7 o'clock and end at 9:30? What if I actually took it out to where the people are and made it more accessible? What if we did it a little differently? What if we actually had chamber music performed in a brew pub and had a chamber series in a brew pub where people could come in and get craft beer and listen to a chamber ensemble? What would that look like? And I think that you begin to get to these questions. So if I'm talking to a person who's starting out in their career, I want them to be questioned like that. Never stop the questioning process. Keep moving forward. Understand that, frankly, it's not about you. It's about what happens when you reach an audience and what that experience is like. The other thing that we acknowledge right now in our work is that we don't really believe we're in the business of trying to support the arts or a performance or the performing arts. We're trying to help people like you, like the artists that are in the hall, like the presenters that are in the hall, reimagine their role and to say that what they're really in the business of is helping people make memory. Having people have an experience of an artistic experience, a creative experience that embeds in their memory that they can carry for the rest of their lives about being with their kids or being with their parents or being with their friends and hearing something or seeing something so profound that it just is there. And our job is to let that memory making happen and not get in the way with a bunch of rules. So think about your career, think about the path you're on, and think about that role of being someone who's going to help people make memories, and that you're gifting this to them.
You have been a profound force in the world of the performing arts in a very good, profound way.
Thank you.
Speaking of memories, how do you want us to remember you? Which we will.
I would say as someone who tried to listen, who tried very hard to support and respect the work that people were doing, that other people were doing. That someone who tried to transcend the transactional and nurtured and built relationship, and that had fun and tried to create an environment where everybody could have fun and feel like they were with family. And that would be it.
Anything else you wish to share?
I think I've probably told all the stories I've got. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Ann.
And we wish you the best.
Thanks so much. It's been fun.